A lovely, warm good evening for folks who've joined here from India and Asia, and a lovely morning to folks in the United States and elsewhere. It has been an amazing opportunity for me personally for the last several days as part of this festival, which is the Data Science Edition, as exciting as it was for me to host a few speakers for the Product Edition a week and a half ago. So today's topic is even more personally engaged for me, as I've had to do this a few times myself as a Vice President for Product Management in McAfee. And the topic is all about monetizing data. How do we do this? Why do we do this? I guess in today's world, why is a moot point, but how remains a continuous mystery for many. And so to help us and to enlighten all of us, we have two amazing industry stalwarts. The first one who we will start with is Nitin. Nitin, Sareen. Nitin, if you're on, do turn the video on so we can kind of see you as well. Nitin is a senior vice president for analytics at Aditya Birla Group. Aditya Birla Group actually created a very special kind of DNA cell to figure out and to establish some good best practices and to drive impact through analytics across the diverse set of business lines for the Aditya Birla Group. As many of you, it's a household name in India, and I'm sure Nitin is going to share a few insights about what that role is. But before this, Nitin was also playing very senior data science executive roles. Most recently, he was the director of data science at Walmart Labs, where he was leading the team and was instrumental in setting up the best practices and the organizational patterns for infusing data science as a decision science across a variety of life cycle of the company, right from site selection to assortment optimization to pricing. As you can all know, Walmart, pricing is bread and butter. It's almost like the soul of the company. Demand forecasting, supply chain, store ops, and so on and so forth, right? So, a role model to many who pursue their career in data science in India. Nitin calls himself a data scientist by accident. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well once he finishes with his presentation. He's very active speaker in a lot of international conferences, a lot of leading data science symposiums, and is also a proud coach and a guest faculty at the Institute of Product Leadership's master's program, MBA, executive MBA in data science, right? So without further ado, over to you, Nitin. We're all looking forward to this amazing session. And what we'll do is we'll continue to take some questions for all of you, as I mentioned, to put those questions in the LinkedIn thread so that we can bring those up to Nitin after his presentation. So over to you, Nitin.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Pinkesh. I'm hoping everybody can hear me fine.
Loud and clear.
Thank you. All right. Okay. That's a nod that helps me. So first of all, I'm super excited to be a part of this session here. As you said, you've been running it for 3 weeks. 1 week has already gone by. This is the 2nd week, and you have another one coming up, exciting week. Just happy to be part of this session. And the way you read out my profile, I never realized, you kind of how embellished you made it sound. It's not really all that great, but thank you. Thanks for the niceties. So I think without wasting a lot of time, because we do have another very eminent speaker who I am personally very interested to hear, let me just jump straight into it. But before I talk about what I want to talk about, I thought I'll quickly have a quick poll. If somebody, Menika or whoever could just put it up for the participants. When you saw the topic data monetization, yeah, there is. I'll put the slides up. There are no slides right now. I'll quickly put them up. But when you all heard the topic data monetization, what is it that you all came to this session expecting? I hope you all can see the slides now.
Yep, we can see them.
Okay, all right, okay. Not sure if I can see the poll results, but yeah, okay. There's a poll that has come up. So if you can just quickly take whatever comes to your mind. This is just my way of keeping you all a little active and not doze off, especially it's 8 p.m. in the evening. All right, it's interesting to see there are some people who are going in for 1 and 3 as well. I know it's all a little bit of a jest, just to keep the mood a little light. Okay, all right. That's good. That's good. So it's good to hear, good to see that most of the people think they want to come here and understand how to estimate the value of data. I think that itself is a very difficult question, and I'm not even going to get into that because you know the true value of data is transient. It's not stationary. It changes with time. If I sometimes think about it, if there could be a nice mathematical equation about what's the real value of data as it stays, gets generated, stays on, and becomes stagnant, and then goes away and becomes stale, sort of like a decay function or a half-life function that we could think of, probably would be a good thing. But maybe once I'm done working and I have some more time thinking about it, I'll probably get to it. But right now, let's go look at it from a little bit more mundane lens, which is how people have been talking about it, industry has been talking about it, and we all know data has been called the new oil for a long period of time. We all know that, but at the same time, given where oil stands today, we all have seen what's the overall standing of oil in the global economy. It's probably not one of those examples that you would probably want to continue giving and go by. So I was thinking about what else is data really the new thing, and I thought maybe data is really the new soil. And why I say soil is because soil is very versatile. You can actually grow very different type of things in that, and it will give you a lot of values. And that's a similar way I look at it, data. And whatever I'm saying today, whatever I'm going to talk about is something not just from one example, one industry, one company that I've worked in, which is either the Birla Group or Walmart or anything before that. It's sort of like a if I take a step back and look at the 2 decades that I've been working on, these are a few things which I've seen and observed, which is what I'm going to talk about. But just like planting any seed and raising a plant and making it into grow into a big tree, and before it starts to bear fruit, there's a lot of work that you need to do. And I'm presuming many of you probably are already doing that function, or you will eventually get into that where you will be the person responsible for really growing something, which could be a data-driven function, or it could be products that you build out of it, where ultimately it's going to bear a lot of fruit. So I think if that being the context, let me just quickly talk about where I see 2-3 different ways data can be monetized. And there's one which, let's say if you're in a company, there's a very internal view that you can take. Okay. So this is just an example, a visual of maybe you've thought of machinery, and I'm talking about this right now is because given Aditya Birla Group, we are actually working on many such cases where there's a whole lot of data that gets generated, and we analyze it, we store it, build some predictive analytics models on top of that, which kind of measure how the machines are going to work, and use that for making sure our operations are more efficient and we're running them in a very efficient way. And doing that way, we are able to extract some value out of that. So that's one way of monetizing the data. There's another way where you have something which is more customer facing. Most of the consumer heavy businesses really do it this way, where they have understanding about your preferences, what you want to buy at what time. Of course, the whole paradigm is changing and shifting very, very rapidly given the current situations, but these things still will hold true. And what kind of offers, what kind of discounts, or whatever you think is going to be needed for the consumers is again driven as an insight, teased out as an insight from the data, and that really creates a lot of value, one for the company as well as for the customers. And there's another one which is purely external, where you build, and many tech-driven product companies are actually going down this route, where they actually sell products and services through a very digital model. And if they are not selling anything, essentially they are giving something to you as free, then you know that you are the product and your data, your information is being sold. And even if you think about a lot of DMPs, who store and amass the data and actually use that and give it to the other companies, are essentially doing that, where they are putting a value to the data and they are selling it to somebody else who is willing to pay that price for that. But for doing any of these things, whether it is very internal to the organization, whether it is customer facing, or whether it is really an external facing product, what you need to do is you need to really go deep, as I was giving the example of that soil, and you need to go and sow the seed very deep and let it with a lot of painstaking efforts grow into a tree and bear fruit. So assume for doing any of these things, you are the person who's doing that. Essentially what you are ending up doing is really building a data driven organization, and that organization could be focused internally or customer facing or external, but at the core of it, it's a very data driven organization that one has to build, and a culture that has to be built around that. Let's say if you were at the helm of all of this, how would you go about doing that? So I'll quickly go through the next slides, because as we all know, Rome was not built in a day. So will a data-driven organization be built in a day or a decade or a few days or a few months or a few weeks. It's going to take time. And there are some, to my understanding, a few very critical components that are required. And I've just laid them out. And it's not necessarily a very linear process, even though we'll go it in a bit of a linear way. But there are a lot of things that are going to come together. And the way I see it, there is a data culture, there's a process, there's infrastructure, there is talent, very, very important, a sense of experimentation, and of course the value that you generate out of it, which is really the true test of time. So let me just dive deep into it. And this is something which I feel is true. Data culture is decision culture. But before I go deeper into it, if I could ask the next question to be put out as a poll, what do you think, whichever organization you are, what is the decision-making culture in your organization? Is it, we just trust all our instincts and we are hunchmen, sort of a play on henchmen? We have our ear to the ground, or in God I trust, everyone else please bring data? It's nice to see each of these options tugging along and competing with each other to become. Okay, all right. We have our ear to the ground certainly has gained ground. 63% voting done, 64%. Okay, maybe we could just land at that. So a fair split between we have our ear to the ground and God I trust, everyone else please bring data. I think these are good things to have. Just going by the hunch is also a valid strategy, but generally what happens is, that hunch, that gut feel comes to anybody once they have gone through it many times over a long period of time, and that becomes your second nature, and that becomes really instinctively your gust. I think that's how I think about it. But in many organizations, once you jump into, and I've seen that as well, is there is a culture of HIPPO. Does anybody know what that is? Unfortunately, we can't really have a lot of interaction here, but HIPPO really stands for highest paid person's opinion. Whoever is the person right at the top, whatever that person thinks or wants to drive, really becomes the culture, really becomes the way the organization runs. But I think that's not the way it really ideally should be. We have to have a very data-driven culture, and that, to my mind, and that's something that I've seen is very important, to really have a culture which is all across and well entrenched and perceived in the organization. But even in that, there are some pitfalls that one needs to watch out for. Just amassing a large volumes of data is not a viable data strategy, and that does not really make a data-driven culture. What makes a data-driven culture in an organization is analyzing data to make better decisions, staying through the business problems, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. And really, at the very end, very important is adoption by the decision makers. Whatever you may do, if it doesn't get adopted, it's not really going to give you any value out of whatever you've done. And I've seen in some places there is this tendency of believing that, hey, I have massive volumes of data. Let's go and see what we can find out of that. Very, very wrong approach. Not at all the right way, because that's not really how you solve a problem and really extract the right value out of that. It's very important to start start from what the business outcome that you want to drive. Maybe something like, I want to grow my portfolio size by X%, or maybe I want to reduce the operating cost by Y%. Maybe I want to increase customer satisfaction by these many basis points in the NPS survey. That's a very solid and very good business outcome to start from. And then start working backwards, figure out what's the landscape of data, what are the nature of insights that you can generate, and then comes at the very end, what kind of analysis technique that you want to use. It's never the thing of, I have a whole lot of data, I have a lot of toolkit with me. I can hire a few bunch of data scientists, and they can just work these two things together, and we'll get something out of that. I think that's not at all the right way of going about doing this. But I think if you really have to set that culture, the tone of a culture, tone of a company, and the culture of any organization really gets set right from the very top. And I think it really has to start all the way from the CEO and right from the overall decision makers. And if they start talking this language, if they start making their decisions based on data-driven insights, then that's really where this culture starts to seep in. But at the same time, there is a little bit of a risk these days. What's happening is all the CEOs, all the senior people are getting bombarded with a lot of talk about data this, data science this, machine learning this, AI that. And I think from what I have observed, this has caused a bit of a dichotomy in the understanding of the leaders. There are some who are sitting on one extreme where they believe that AI is the magic wand, which is going to solve all the problems without any delay. And there is the other extreme, which is really the skeptics, and who think this whole AI and machine learning and data science is all snake oil. It's not really going to make any difference because they know their business the best, and nothing else is going to change. So I think as product managers or people who are driving this transformation, who are driving this change within an organization, you have to really bring that pragmatic balance and that lens of pragmatism to both the sides, and bring them closer to the center from either extremes, and really make them literate. It's very important to really drive the literacy about what it is, what it can do, what it cannot do, what are the limitations, what are the benefits, right from the top. Once that culture starts to come in, you'll see a lot of it flowing down and percolating down the organization. Again, the processes, what are the processes that we have to make data really being available and decisions being made out of that. So again, a quick poll at this time. If I could just ask the moderator to put the poll up. What do you think where you are, and what you see is the process of getting the data and storing the data? Where is your data? Okay. And I got a little cheesy out here when I was thinking of these questions. The favorite one being what we all have been hearing is there's less pollution, such less pollution that you can actually see the data in the cloud. That cracked me up, and I thought, I'll just crack a little joke here for you all.
May not be a bad one post COVID. Actually, it may happen, Nitin.
That's exactly what the joke was going around. The meme was, there is so less pollution, I can see my data in the cloud. Okay. All right. So I see people are looking at the serious part of it and keeping the joke aside, which is a lot of it is sitting in the cloud. I think that's a good strategy. We actually have to have a whole lot of combination of these things, even getting some external data from outside. And let me just talk about where I have seen and the things which organizations are going towards. One is have to have a process. It cannot just happen like that. Everything these days is data driven. There is a very large digital footprint that everything has. Data is almost raining, and what you need is, again, keeping in the analogy of really data being the new soil. If you have to grow something, you have to start harvesting all the rain. You have to really invest in a rainwater harvesting system. So again, my understanding is, you have to have capture, process, and democratize the entire data. That's the money slide from this point of view. How do you go about doing that is something that let's just spend a few minutes talking about it. There are many sources of data, internal and external. Anything that you're doing these days, as I was saying, everything has a digital footprint. And I think there's also this one way of thinking there is a data glut and I need to store each and every data. That's not really the right approach. You have to be real cautious about what data really will make a lot of sense and will be useful. And these data sources could be business applications, product applications, monitoring systems, and whatnot. even all the customer interaction points. Wherever you see there is a important decision, an important part of the process that is happening, there's a lot of data that gets generated, and it's important to store it right now and start using it. Of course, third-party vendors do bring in a lot of very external and very uniquely different data view, which until now, as just an internal view, you would not have. And it's important to look at it from that point of view as well. The price that you pay for that, that's a different question. And we can, again, have a long discussion around that. But very important is democratize the data. Once you have an inventory of all your data sources, standardized data capture, consolidate the data repository, ease of access, no silos, generate the insights, and make the strategic decisions coming out of that. But very important is ease of access and no silos. Democratization of data really means everybody has access to all the data at the same level of granularity, at the same level of transparency. Having transparent access to data by all the different functions of the organization is going to make those conversations honest, because there's been this whole long-standing belief that information is power, and people have the tendency of holding the information close to their chests because they believe that it makes it powerful. I think if you start doing that with data as well, it's only going to hurt the organization. And what decisions that you can take with much better, cleaner, and fairer data access to everybody is not going to happen. So I think it's very, very important. Of course, when we talk about easy access, there's also a very important part of ensuring there is data governance and privacy and transparency. And data governance is not just about putting an MDM system. It's much more than that. It's just about having the right kind of, you have your crown jewels in data, things that you absolutely have to get right all the time. There are some things which you can probably live with a little bit of error. So you need to have that kind of an approach in data governance as well. Privacy, very important. Who at what level of jobs and functions has access to what level of data? If it is about people-centric data and private data and sensitive data, you don't really want that floating around everywhere. So there has to be a privacy angle as well. And then infrastructure, once you have all this data coming together, how do you store all of that? I read it recently in one of the articles where HBR says if your company isn't good at data, then it's not ready for AI. So it really is the bedrock. And I'm just going to skip through some of these slides very quickly, because this is something which is not the core essence of the topic, but very important for us to understand. You collect, you move, you store, explore, and transform the data. That's really what's going to give you meaningful insights. And one has to move from very ineffective infrastructures to more effective infrastructures, which can drive effective insights. And cloud, as you all said, I'm happy to hear that, is really fast becoming the de facto standard for storing and amassing and democratizing and using the data. Of course, there has to be a combination, and there are people who are more qualified than me to make the right architecture about what data needs to sit in which type of storage. But I think cloud just makes it very easy for a very easy access, and it's also adaptable to a variety of storage needs that one has. After that, there is very important thing for people to have the right kind of best-in-class tools to one store, to analyze and visualize the data. Because whatever you've done in terms of data processing and storage, if you're not analyzing it, and even after you've done the analysis, if you're not putting it in easy to consume and understand way, a lot of decisions will not happen. And I can share some examples. Is you can make the most complex of the models, but if it is not understood in the right way, people don't understand what you're trying to say, and it doesn't give them an easy way of interacting it through some sort of a visualization, some sort of an interaction. It's not going to get consumed and adopted. And as I said right in the beginning, adoption is the most important thing. Just a few things, again, need not necessarily be the exhaustive list, need not necessarily be that I'm supporting and promoting any of them, but things that I have seen which are really becoming fast the standards, where people are using these things for storage, analysis, as well as visualization for many of data-driven things. Very, very critical part of the whole equation is talent. And I'm talking to hopefully people who are already playing the role, are going to play the role. There is this whole thing of translators or citizen data scientists. And I think many of you will probably be very, very close to that, where either you're part of a business or very close to the business. But this is something where these two personas of talent sit very, very close to the business, who are taking business decisions, understand the business problems, and what decisions need to be done. They need to also become very eloquent and comfortable with using data, reading data, and also understanding what goes in behind that. And I think it's important for any one of you who's going to really become and enhance their roles is not to be oblivious and unaware of what the next two set of personas do, which is the data engineers and data scientists. While Typically, data engineers could most likely be part of IT organization. And again, I'm not propagating any such org structures, but wherever they need to sit, this is where their core focus needs to be. And data scientists who are going to use a whole lot of tools and technology to solve complex problems. I think as product managers and people who are driving this thing right at the pole position need to understand the nuances of many of these things. You may not necessarily have a very, very deep knowledge and be the experts yourselves about any of these things, but you have to have a good working knowledge so that when somebody is talking to you, you are not alien to that language. It's very important to learn that language if you have to drive that transformation. Experimentation. You are the people who are going to really be very critical in driving this thing. And I think all this experimentation has to start with a very clear hypothesis. As I said, maybe, you want to grow the portfolio by X%, or even if you've launched a certain thing, you have a hypothesis that it's going to lead to a certain uptake of a certain quantity. And if it doesn't happen, what happens? Once you have built the hypothesis, you have to define success metrics, because if you don't define the success metric up front, you can actually very quickly go into the spiral where you will have a lot of data, you will probably have done a lot of experiments, and you can torture the data long enough to make it speak what you want it to speak. So unless you have defined the success metrics up front, it is going to be a spiral that you'll find it very difficult to come out of. Once you've defined the metrics, is it 2% or the right KPI, which is going to go up by this percent, is going to be the benchmark for your success or failure for that particular experiment that you're doing, is only when you get to the hypothesis testing, which is you actually get the data around it, run the analysis, test the hypothesis. Oops, I'm moving in the wrong direction. And once you have the hypothesis, you know it for a fact. It's not going to be the first time where you'll just find the answers in the right way. You'll have to learn and iterate. It's an iterative process. It cannot give you the things right at the first go. And from my experience, what I've also realized is if you think that you are going to solve all the problems yourself, I think you're mistaking yourself, as well as you're not doing the right justice to the organization, because some things need to move with a very quick pace. And there are enough and more startups outside who have spent enough time, energy, and focus on building some very niche, nifty solutions. And it's always important for you to always keep an eye out of your organization, whatever you're doing, to see where the startups are really bringing some part of the solution. And you understand probably they will not really be solving their entire piece of the puzzle, but they may have something which is very small, but bring that piece in, link it up to the overall thing that you're trying to solve for and what you're trying to build, and see how it fits in. It's very important to learn from outside, and startups are a great place to just keep constantly looking out and finding out what's happening out there. And this brings me to the very end of it, the value, which is what is going to make or break is how do you articulate the value. You've done all of these things. The question that is going to come either from inside the organization, which could be leadership, or if it's a startup, from the investors, or if you are selling some information to outside as a data-driven product, what is the value of whatever you're suggesting? And it's very important to have that clearly articulated. So predefine, because any place, you'll probably have a lot of places to go in and focus your energies and efforts on. Predefine a value discovery framework, which is the lens that you're going to apply all the time. If I have 5 things in front of me and I can probably work on all of them, what do I need to focus on? Have a guesstimate, have a view of what's going to give you the biggest bang of the buck. Focus on that. Benchmark the levers which are going to be affected by analytics, which is exactly what I meant when I said a little while ago. Have the metrics predefined. Don't look for the metrics at the far end of the whole analysis and exercise. And very important, align your efforts to either of these 3 levers, is what my understanding has been. Either you're growing the revenue for the company, or you're reducing the cost, or you're upping the customer satisfaction. If your efforts are not aligned to any of these things, there could be probably some small little things which could probably still give you some runway. But as per my experience, these are the only 3 things which really matter to the business: internal, external, anything else is all going to get aligned to that. So this just wraps up from my end. I hope I have not done very poorly on time. Is if you really have to build a data-driven organization which will help you and enable you to monetize the value of data, these are a few things that you need all together. And I quickly wanted to share, what my perspectives have been while doing this at a few different places, what you need. And I hope you all can take something away with you today and use it for your future.
Fantastic. Very very power packed, highly interactive. Love the different polls that kept everybody awake and on their toes. A lot of insights in that short time. So truly appreciate Nitin. Right from chasing the right value to talent, to kind of move away from the HIPPO to the building blocks of data. And the most exciting one, I really like it. Data is not the new oil; it's the new soil. So with that, there's a lot of questions that have piled up here. Especially the ones that I see here from Saurabh Singh Tomar from Creative Play, Srini from GE. How much data do you need before you start monetizing, for example? Puneet from Ultratech, Sandeep from S&P Global. So keep the questions coming. In interest of time, what I'm going to try and do is let Manish go with his presentation and then kind of open up some of these questions to perhaps both of you. I hope, Nitin, you can kind of stay back till the end of the session if you can.
I'm looking forward to hear from Manish. Yeah, thank you.
Super, super. Well, on top of this, we now have another super duper speaker with us here. Manish, welcome. We all can see you. If you can say something, we can also check whether we can hear you or not.
Hey guys.
Super, excellent. Manish is another stalwart that I think a lot of people look up to as a role model for somebody who has transcended from technology, business, and data science, and sitting at that intersection, if you will. Manish is currently the president of technology, analytics, and capabilities at Lending Card. Who better to understand this topic of monetizing data in a company like Lending Card, where the business model of who to lend and how much to lend is all dependent on data, right? And so he's responsible for building up the stack, improving the risk mitigation, the analytics, the overall efficiency, customer acquisition and experience. But what's more interesting is that before this, he had a pivotal role he was playing at Amazon. He was actually the CTO of Amazon Pay, pioneering some of the early fintech rollouts in the country. He was the founding team member at Amazon, setting up some of the most exciting and arguably the most difficult things, right from doorstep payments experience to financing programs, issuance of gift cards, and many of these, high value, high experimental products that Amazon had to roll out. He's also been involved in, kind of co-founding multiple new businesses in Amazon, most notably the Amazon Home Services as well. Manish loves to hike and play drums. I guess with the current pandemic, I hope it's been less of hiking and more of drumming. But certainly warm welcome to the session here, and all yours, Manish. Super excited to have you. Now, while Manish gets up his presentation, I'd like to have the poll for the audience. And the poll is going to be a very interesting one now that you've heard Nitin in terms of monetizing data, some of the structure, some of the process. What are the current comfort level? If you were to ask people on this group, what is your current comfort level around monetizing data? And let's kind of understand. Hopefully, it gives you a perspective, Manish, on the current sentiments of which of these statements. And it's a multiple choice question, so people can choose as many as they feel or as they agree with, to give you a sense of where everybody else is thinking, at least on this call with this group of 300 folks. And it's not very surprising. I think the top ranking feature or response on the poll is exactly the reason why we wanted to have this session from the community to begin with, right? A lot of people feel that obviously data is important. It has to be monetized, but they're kind of struggling to figure out how to, right? And so, with that, over to you, Manish, and take it away.
Hey, thanks for having me, Pinkesh. It's really a pleasure to be a part of this conference. So really looking forward to chatting with you guys. Really loved the presentation that Nitin actually gave before this. So, I'm going to try dynamic polls next time. I don't have dynamic polls planned this time, so there's some good learning for me there. Actually, the polls that you started off with, they gives me a great segue into some of the topics that I really wanted to cover today, and how to understand data and how do you really monetize it, right? And I think monetization is an overloaded term, I would say, right? Where it's basically actions or processes of earning revenue from an asset, right? And you could define asset as, either it's servicing, is it it's probably an IP that you have, consultation, it could be product, obviously data. So it's essentially just how do you get revenue? And I'll go into the details of, how do you look at those? How do you differentiate them? What are the different phases you could sort of think about monetization? So, hopefully people will take back something related to that, after I'm done. So, starting off, like, whenever you look at data, right, we actually don't think about it that way, right? But history plays a big part in data monetization. Why history? Because, you always want to reuse by being inspired, right? Using data to look at past performance in similar situations and suggest patterns and models to make your decision more prominent or more likely to be done correctly. So without looking back into the history of what really was captured, it becomes very difficult for us to say, okay, I have data, but I don't know what to do with it. And how do you reuse data and how you drive inspiration with all the models, all the types of data, segmentation that you've done with that data. And using that data, how do you make sure that the current decisions that you're trying to make are more apt, right? It's also about continuous improvement. Now, you're looking at the data, you've made some decisions, you've come up with some patterns, right? But how do you close loop that feedback by capturing the decisions and then measuring them in the future? So what you're doing is, presently you're capturing those decisions with the history of data that you have, and then figuring out sometime in the future when you become history at the current state, saying, okay, now all the decisions that I made at T, now it's T plus N. Now, how do I go back and figure out did the decisions that I made were correct or not? So this whole closed loop of continuous improvement becomes a super important piece. But you generally operate in the history so that you can improve the future, right? So that is a very essential part of how you would think about data monetization. And generally, I've always thought about any sort of monetization, even data, in 3 different phases, right? The first is internal first, like eat your own dog food, which means that, whenever you think about monetization, it could be, oh, how do I run a service and, sell it to the external world? But what's really important is really understanding data so that your organizations gains from it. And, and since it's a revenue, even internal use cases are actually monetization, right? So there are obviously different types of monetization. There's top line, there is revenue growth, there is bottom line, which is cost reduction. Generally, being on the top line and changing those things are a little bit more fancier. But generally, if you look at bottom line improvements, every dollar you spend, actually every dollar you save because of bottom line improvements, you would have to actually sometimes, depending on your industry, if it's retail, it's about 1:6. So you have to save $6 in top line versus $1 in bottom line to make sure that you actually equalizes. So bottom line and top line are both important when it comes to internal first, using data so that your organization improves. Now, part 2 is once you've done internal first, eat your own dog food, like thing. Next comes productization. Now, it is still internal. It is still eating your own dog food. But how do you make the processes? How do you make it more extensible? How do you make models more accessible for different services, different components? so that the reach of what you've created extends in your organization. The third, obviously, this is whenever you think about monetization is externalize, is also true. But the first two are, I feel, if you're not into directly monetizing data, the first two are precursors for you to even think about externalization. And then once you've done a great job on the first two, you could externalize it, sell data, sell access to your customers, insights, SaaS, all those things actually come later. Now, obviously, internal first, productization, externalization, right? Now, what I wanted to do is actually draw some parallels with what we had done in Lending Card as in these three different phases. And I'm just going to use a case study around loan origination. So obviously, Lending Card is into giving unsecured working capital loans to MSMEs. What we initially did was build capabilities to consume data from multiple resources or sources. Then obviously build the DS model and ML on top of that stands as the core of our credit decisioning. And then over the last 2 to 3 years, what we've done is fine-tuned various different attributes, segmentation, to basically better serve our customers. Now, as we internalized the product, we also worked on some level of productization, like internally, how do you make sure that these things that we've created are more consumable within the organization? Worked on data warehouse, end-to-end data capturing, from clickstream to funneling to dispersal. How does it all happen? Everything is more accessible. Obviously created simple MIS reports, dashboard, workable reports, Power BI, so that you can actually self-serve yourself. And provided access points, right? Once you've created this rich set of data and models on top, how do you create access points for anyone in your organization, any relevant groups and services in your organization, to have easy reach into these using, probably rules engine, ML, AI. And then obviously experimentation by productization, right? Now, anything around data is always about experimentation. I was talking to you about how do you actually make sure that you look at the history and take decisions today, and then in the future measure whether you've closed loop it and is it great or not. So experimentation and A/B testing becomes a super important part of what you would do. And then obviously continuous improvement in underwriting. So obviously we internalized our product, productized our product, and in the future, and what we've also done is with all of this build, we've taken it externally, right? So now what we've also we offer as a service, as a SaaS model, is co-lending. And we build APIs and dashboards to enable other NBFCs and banks to actually use the services that we've built, and provide these rules which are much more extensible. Co-learners can actually come in and apply changes, make policy changes. Partnerships are more done on that basis, and overall monetize the SaaS offering with multiple different kinds of partnerships. So I think if we just step back and think about monetization, it's not just about what are the services you're selling to the external world. It's about these three phases of how do you internalize, how do you productize, and then how do you externalize what you build, where each one of these steps actually helps the organization with different revenue streams. So one way to sort of think about it. One of my last quick slides around how do you build a robust data monetization strategy, which is now in this day and age really important, right? What benefits the companies as a result of that? It also provides, if you really have a good monetization strategy, it provides new sources of revenue for your company. It also enables different types of internal services, external services that you can extend to various different groups and different companies. Improves customer loyalty. Obviously, you want to make sure that the data you're using, you're increasing the stickiness, customers are more happier with what you're giving, and there's continuous improvement. And I think this is something that was also covered, was encourages data-driven product leadership. And this is so important, even from a culture standpoint, is generally what I've also seen in different various different organizations is, you go looking for data after a certain event has happened. Now, how do you switch that around to where every single decision or product features that you would want to build are actually guided by data, right? And that switch and that flip in mental model actually defines, how mature your organization is in terms of data and how do you monetize it. So with that, I would conclude my presentation. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Very, very insightful, and I think you hit it on the punch where, it's all about kind of data-driven product leadership. I really like, and I think the audience walked away with some very interesting, sequence of internalize, productize, and externalize, right? Kind of the phases of monetizing. So brilliant. Thanks for sharing that insights in a very crisp and a fast fashion. Now, let me kind of switch to some of the questions that the audience have been itching to ask. And let me kind of combine the two questions that I saw, one from Srini at GE, one from Sumit Garg at Mobi TV. And so the question broadly is, while data monetization is obviously desirable, is important, both of you kind of elaborately explained how phases. The question is, how much is necessary before you can monetize? And I think Sumit's question to add on was, is there a time period? Is there a window that you need to wait? Is there a little bit of this aging of the whiskey that has to happen before the taste comes up, right? So what's your thought there? Both of you, any of you can go for it.
Okay. To my mind, and based on my experience, there is never a pinpoint or a time marker that you'll arrive at where you'll think that, hey, this is the right time when you have enough data, and this is the right time to start maximizing the value out of it. My experience is, of course, it cannot be based on very, very thin and very slim data. You cannot really build a forecasting model on just 2 to 3 data points or a very small thing. You can't estimate seasonality unless you have seen a few seasons. I mean, that's one way of putting it, right? So you have to wait for some data to be there, and that I think there are some statistical things of, you should have at least 30 data points and whatnot. But there is this confidence, there is this error rate that you can start measuring when you start building some models, which will give you some confidence about how well you understand the process and how confident your models are in predicting what you're trying to predict. And when that happens, you start taking it. But I think it's a journey. It's not a start and a stop that you start from here and stop here. It's a journey that you need to set a lot of basic groundwork even before you start to see the value coming out of it. As I was talking about, a lot of things, which is, setting the right processes, start storing the data starts becoming ready, and you start analyzing it. But before that, even when all that is happening, you can start setting up the right processes. You can set up the right ways of using that, whether it is about implementing it and taking it to business decisions internally, or as Manish very nicely put it, internalize, productize, and externalize. You start setting those other things so that when you have the data matured, start taking it out, test it out, see if there is a value that you are able to articulate and have people see the value of that. And again, make it very clear right from the very beginning that those metrics are defined right up front. The moment you start seeing those metrics inching upwards, you'll see the value coming out of it. So I think that's an iterative way. There are some quantum of data that you need, but there is no right time marker that at least I have understood. Manish, your views probably would be helpful as well.
I completely agree. I think there's nothing much to add on that. It is an iterative process, and it's about looking at your history, as I said, and looking at the future with all the mistakes and errors that you've done with so it has to be an iterative process. You'll never be perfect.
So maybe a pointed question to that, Manish. Obviously you use data to make decisions, to loan to certain MSMEs. And I think this is a pertinent question. Rohit Nagpal from Experience Flow is also asking, when you're starting something, you obviously don't have enough data. And I'm sure when Lending Card started, while the vision and the mission was clear, that not having enough access to enough data, how do you deal with that cold start problem? when it comes to leveraging data and monetizing data?
Yeah. No, I think that's a great question. You start capturing data. Now, forget about monetization. Just capture all the possible sorts of data that you could actually get a hands on. Different sources, the customer, his credit score, all the all the IP related ML model that you just sort of keep capturing them. Now, the beauty of the history of data is in the future, you could figure out all the different loans that you've given, right? And what were the default rates, how many, which were the good customers, which were not. And with that history of data, you could apply that model to figure out where would you land, right? That's the beauty of the history of data that you should never let go.
Interesting.
If I may just butt in, if I may just butt in a little bit, I've kind of seen a very nice framework, which is sometimes even if you don't have anything and the cold start problem, just go out maybe on the limb or with some gut feel or with some business rules and start the process and let that process feed the next set of data. Of course, there are biases that you need to be careful about, that, that process or the decision that you've taken up front don't lead to biases which you're not able to correct for in the future, but let that cycle grow so that you experience it. And, the whole product management cycle is very much like that. You go out there, you get the feedback, iterate, and then improve it. Similar works in data science as well.
Apply the MVP, no different. In this case, it's just application is on data. Yeah. One of the other trends that I'm seeing for the questions which are pouring in is around this whole notion of, privacy, what is allowed, what is not, obviously certain countries, what is legal, what is not. Quick thought, and there's a big debate, right? This will probably require a session of its own. And I think we have one, 2 days from now on something like this. But just a quick take. Here's Rajrita Datta from DBS Bank, who's also asking, are there any quick do's and don'ts from a legal and regulation perspective, and especially lending card? Obviously you have to probably play with this a lot more, being a fintech company, on what can you do with that data, with or without the consent of the user. Are there any kind of measures, processes, do's or don'ts on what you can or what you should or should not be doing with that data?
Yeah.
Any quick tips?
No, it's a very deep topic, and there are various different angles and regulations, things like that. I think overall, from a regulatory standpoint, India is just sort of getting started at looking at data and its regulations. Actually, the entire world, and there's more to come. The problem is where when regulations change very quickly, it just becomes very expensive for organizations to actually tune to those regulations. So I think a framework that people could look at and organizations can tune to that. And then, once the regulations are clear, it just becomes easier for different organizations to abide by that. Having said that, data should always be private. There has to be right level of consent, right level of exchange of, if you're exchanging data, everything has to be well thought through, before that happens. And it is something that, most of the organizations actually take it very seriously.
Very interesting. I think we may have just about the time to take one or two quick ones and kind of, top of the hour, wrap this up. And the one that I think it's going to be a hard thing for me to kind of choose from all these good questions here. But I think broadly speaking, one of the trend that I'm seeing in these questions is this whole notion of, and I think, Nitin, you talked a little bit about this, talent. A data science person understanding business and a business person trying to understand data science. And obviously there is no one right answer, one size that fits all. But in your view, if you had to choose one, in a very prescriptive way, which of the two, would you recommend from a professional growth perspective? That's about the organizational view, and take a more professional view of an individual who wants to now move into a data science manager type of role, applying a lot of these frameworks and best practices that both of you mentioned. which one do you think has a higher odd of winning out in this space?
A very
Go
difficult
with you
question, Jim.
first, Manish.
Okay, all right, we'll go with Manish.
Go ahead, go ahead. You already started. You already started. Go ahead.
Please.
Okay. No, I was just saying it's a very difficult question. You know, we, as a practitioner, data scientist for 2 decades, you know, if you were to ask me what would I have chosen, I still would have chosen this. But let me put two lenses to it. One is, you cannot just say that I know the business very well and I can trivialize the whole data science aspect of it, which is understanding the very technical aspects of the probabilities, the statistics, the mathematics, and the programming bit of it, and you know, it cannot be trivialized. There is a very hard science behind it, and that cannot be just learned overnight. At the same time, you know, if you have somebody who only understands or only talks the language of machine learning models and does not understand how it's going to be utilized in the business, is also going to not be the right thing. So there has to be a right balance. It may seem easier for somebody who has the technical expertise to gain the business knowledge. However, if you have to really make a choice, I would say, you know, lean towards business, because you can always find these days the way the whole industry is also emerging. There's going to be easier and easier to build models. Sometimes even just throwing a lot of compute on data is going to give you something. But again, you know, don't be fooled by that. It's not going to always be the right thing. But not having the business lens is always going to be more costly to anybody who's trying to build something. And I say that, you know, at a lot of risk of, you know, antagonizing a lot of data science community against me, but I said it.
Yeah, especially the graduate from ISI Calcutta saying that means even more provocative, right? Manish, your quick thought on that?
I think it's like asking when can I become an entrepreneur, right? So you just have to follow your passion. And you know, if you're doing it because someone else is saying that you're ready for it, I think that would be the wrong thing to do. So you know, just following your passion, and you know, if you're smart and if you're observant, and you know, you have the right senses to basically apply logic, you know, and you can't just be a manager, right? What you can't be is, you know, I'm a manager of data scientists and data engineers, so I don't need to understand. I feel that deep understanding and connect with any functional, manager or not, is super important.
Super. And with that, a power pack session. Thanks a lot again, Manish and Nitin. You know, amazing insights. I'm sure the participants walked away with a lot of exciting insights. I took a bunch of notes.